5, 4, 3, 2, 1, action. Oh, now it goes lights, camera, action. Yeah, kitty. Yay. Okay. So, welcome to the second week of Eastern Hemisphere Studies. So, this first lesson is focused on history's first mystery. As you learned last week, we divide the sources we find in history into two categories: primary sources that were made by the people who lived at the time, and secondary sources that are made by scholars writing later, always based on primary sources. So primary are called primary because they're the most important. They are the root of everything we understand about history. So the first mystery that the primary sources show us, is a big change. And hopefully you have participated in our opening discussion, which was to predict why there was a difference in the tools between one period and the next. We find a whole bunch of differences, and we're going to go into those. But first of all, in case you did not review your geography last week, we need to remember that there are 7 continents. Hopefully that's pretty easy for you. But I want to draw your attention to this little line right here. Why does there have to be a little line between Europe and Asia if the definition of a continent is a large mass of land surrounded or nearly surrounded by water? This does not look like water. The Ural Mountains are there. There are some little straits in here, which are very narrow strips of land. Strips of water, rather. So the fact that Europe and Asia are largely one continent is why we often call it Eurasia. Okay? Sometimes we'll also refer to it as Afro-Eurasia. Why? Because it's pretty much possible to walk from here to here with only the aid of a very small boat somewhere along here. But it's possible for people throughout history to get across without the use of advanced technology. Unlike getting down to Australia, which required a lot of seafaring expertise. So it's quite different going here as opposed to just going here. So Afro-Eurasia we look at as kind of linked together. Okay, so generally speaking, and you do not need to do this part, that's from my live class, but our map shows here that humans originated in Africa, according to the fossil record and according to the artifacts we've found, and according to genetic studies. So that is the scientific explanation, and many religions have different ideas, but here we're going to tell you just what the scientific record says. So as you can see, humans are this lightest color, Neanderthals are the second lightest color, and then there are early hominids here. So that's very, very early human beings. Humans are the white lines that spread across the whole planet. The first place that humans left out of our origins in southern and central Africa was the Middle East, which we reached at about 100,000 years ago. Then into the Indian subcontinent and southern Asia about 70,000 years ago. These are some very fertile, prosperous areas of the world, so it took them a long time to leave. Here you can see 40,000 years ago, both humans and Neanderthals traveled out of Africa. I told you that wasn't much of a barrier right there, into Europe. So we start to see human remains, fossils, primary sources in Europe at that time. 50,000 years ago, shortly after, these islands are navigated through early navigation techniques, early naval boating techniques to get to Australia, then New Zealand, and finally, no, this is New Zealand, it's down here. So these are some other islands. Up here, you see around 15,000 years ago, and these dates are still being pushed back as we find more and more evidence. We say that humans migrated into the Americas, finally reaching the United States, the area where we live, about 12,000 years ago, and traveling all the way to the tip of South America at Tierra del Fuego. So that's just a brief overview. You do not have to do this unless you want to. It is a fun map. So this is how we filled up the globe, and we did so before we invented agriculture. We were wanderers. Well, we call the period before we invented agriculture the Paleolithic. Paleo is the word for old. Neo is the word for new. Okay, it's a root word. Paleolithic, Neolithic. So the Paleolithic is what we think of as sort of stereotypical cavemen, very nomadic, subsist mainly on hunting and gathering, depending on where they are. They might have a range of 100 miles or a range of 30 miles. It just depends how rich the land is. As you can see, the hunter-gatherers in this area use skins to build their homes. They're probably very portable homes. They can be erected pretty quickly. Probably a forerunner of perhaps the yurt. They live in a northern environment. And really, for most of our history, the Stone Age was going on. The Ice Age was going on, and it was very cold. So hunting was really important because when it is winter during an ice age, you don't have a lot of plant life to subsist on. So lots of really fun giant mammals inhabited the early human environment. Just enjoy those. They're really fun. And so much of the reason why early humans wandered so much is probably because they were following the herds that they subsisted on for food. Some of the remains we have include rock art. So these were certainly people like you and I who like to doodle or to make creative pieces. They were in every way similar to us. They had language, clothing, art, religion. Family life would have been very important. And of course, there are stereotypes. The bow is quite a late invention, so this painting's a little inaccurate. They're often depicted with clubs, which isn't necessarily fair. But they certainly did use tools extensively, and they wore, from what we can tell, they wore the skins of the animals they hunted. The most important thing in all of these images is the communal aspect. They are together in bands. They don't live in groups of 4. They live in groups of 30 to 50 individuals. So that was the majority of human history, 90% of it. But between 12,000 and 1000 BCE, farming started to appear. As you can see, the dark orange places are the centers of the origins of food production, and the yellow are now where today we have the most food production. So the thing about agriculture is it allows you to grow and store more food than one person needs. So one farmer can produce enough food for 2 or 3 or 30 or 300 individuals, depending on how productive he is or the land is. So not everyone had to grow food or tend animals anymore. In the Paleolithic, everyone is involved in working probably not too hard. It was probably a relatively nice lifestyle, but you basically had enough food for now and then maybe next week and a little bit stored for winter. But there wasn't a whole lot of extra time because everyone needed to be involved in this. Everyone moved together following the herds. Everyone moved together collecting berries. But when you have settlement and agriculture, people can stay in one place and a few people can farm and the others can do other things. There's a whole cascade of changes then. We call it job specialization. And both men and women can become perhaps a weaver, a stonemason, or a potter, or a priest, or a scribe, or a trader, or a king, or an emperor, or a movie star, or a skateboarder. The only reason why people in the Olympics can be in the Olympics, for instance, it's an Olympic year when I'm recording this, is because someone somewhere is growing food to feed them. So let's look at this cause and effect chart really quick. We've got the domestication of plants and animals up here. That leads to farming, which then leads to surplus food. It also allows the population to grow. You're going to learn a little bit about that later in the lesson. It also allows people to specialize and have different jobs. With these things combined, humans start to settle in groups that come to be known as civilizations. Civi is the root of the word civilization, and it means city. It means large numbers of people come together around their food source and have many different kinds of jobs that they then trade in order to get their food. So all the things that we associate with civilization, farmers, herders, cities, governments, armies, monument building, written language, social hierarchies, complex belief systems, religions. 12,000 years ago in 10,000 BCE, none of these existed in the world at all. And then, by 1000 BCE, all of these things exist. It's very rapid change, and it's a change we see in both the primary and the secondary sources. In the next phase of this lesson, you're going to be looking at what the basic building blocks of a civilization are. You're probably familiar with some of them if you have been on track in school. And we're going to look at how these sort of emerge in the Eastern Hemisphere over time. So here's our little globe man. And he's pointing out that look at this. We have the development of language 200,000 years ago. We have the development of art. And then, my goodness, within the last 10,000 years, look at all of these things. Temple building, pottery, chariots, walled cities, letters and envelopes, pyramids, law codes, calendars, iPhones. So it really shows you that the pace of change has been exponential. It goes whoop, very quickly. And we're going to talk about that next lesson.